Hi, everyone has just arrived. We're going to wait for 3 minutes or so to start. I feel like we need some light jazz kind of elevator music or something. All right, perhaps we should get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion today. We're very happy to have you here. Before I introduce the event and Tunay introduces our speakers, I just want to let you know that the meeting is being recorded. So if anyone would like to turn off their camera or doesn't consent to that, then you can leave the meeting now. If you want to change your name, that's possible in the Zoom function. If you want to change your pseudonym, feel free. So I'm Daniela Petrosino, and I'm one of the SVR team members, along with Tunay. There he is. I'll just give you a few words about SVR. So SVR, which stands for Studie and Vortragsfreie Gender Studies, is a student lecture series independently organized by volunteers that started almost 3 years ago. We've held a couple of lecture series in the winter semester at HU Berlin in the past, and then last year we had a conference, and at the moment we're in the midst of organizing an anthology of previous speakers' works. And for this event, we've partnered with the Margherita van Brentano Center at the FU Berlin at Freie Universität to organize this event. So I'll just give you a few words about the Margherita van Brentano Center. The Center is dedicated to initiating and supporting international collaborative research and teaching projects that advance the interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, intellectually critical, and self-reflective potential of gender studies as a field. One of its key tasks is to support students and early career researchers and to establish and coordinate interdisciplinary and international support networks to provide more opportunities for exchange and collaboration globally. You'll find them all over Twitter and Instagram and Facebook if you want to stay tuned about their events. And it's really nice to have this partnership with the Margherita von Brentano Center because their aims are so close to ours. SVR Gender Studies is about providing a platform for students, particularly in the lower or in the BA and MA level of study, to showcase their gender studies related work from a variety of backgrounds. Yeah, we're going to post our social media links in the chat in a minute. So if you want to follow us, please do. This panel discussion today brings together, is called Collective Revision, Writing the Loneliest of Tasks, and it's our opening event to a workshop we're holding tomorrow, in which several students will collaboratively discuss a paper or project that they're currently working on. So we thought this event would be a nice opportunity to open that workshop by bringing together 5 people from different backgrounds, from the arts, from activism, from academia, who all in some way practice writing as a central part of their work. Oh yeah, thanks Tunay for posting that. Okay, so a quick note about format. Yeah, we plan for this panel discussion to be quite conversational and interactive. So Tunay and I will ask some questions as moderators, but then the audience is welcome to send the questions of their own. You can write these in the chat or indicate that you have a question in the chat, and then we will call on you to ask it. So feel free to unmute yourselves and ask questions, or if you prefer that one of the moderators asks your question on your behalf, then just say so in the chat. And yeah, now Tunay, Altay, one of our, and I also really want to thank our fellow SVR organizers, Karina and Hazal, for all of the work they did to make this event happen. Over to you, Tunay.
Thank you very much, Daniela, for this nice introduction. A heartfelt welcome to everyone who is joining us today. Our panelists, our audience, is so nice to get together, even digitally. So now I will shortly introduce the panelists, but again, it will be hopefully interactive. First up, we have İrem Aydın. İrem Aydın is a Berlin-based freelance theater director, writer, editor, and community organizer. İrem, would you like to tell us something about yourself?
Hello, hi. First of all, thank you so much for this invitation. It's so nice to be here with everyone. Yes, my name is İrem, and I moved from Turkey to Germany 2.5 years ago. I'm a freelance theater director and writer and community organizer. Well, I try to organize community events, let's say. And I also moderate workshops where I try to gather as much as people, also to build up this community where they can reflect on their own memories, experiences in form of creative writing. And I try to focus on different topics such as immigration, digitalism, LGBTQI issues, and yes, diversity, I would say. So that would be all, I guess. I'm not so good at introducing myself.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Ram. We will have more questions about your practice as well, so no worries. Next up, we have Nina Friedman. Nina Friedman is currently pursuing their master's studies in gender studies at University of Utrecht and University of Granada. Welcome, Nina.
Everyone, first off, thank you to be a part.
Nina, I think your connection is breaking. Let's see. Nina, can you hear us? Would you, okay.
Can you?
Yes, we can hear you, but it's breaking. So what shall we do?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, hardly.
Okay.
Oh yeah, now it's better. Now it's better.
Is it working now?
Yes, it does. Yes.
Okay, I apologize about that. Yeah, the internet connection just tends to be unstable in the whole city of Granada. But yes, thank you all so much for having me. I feel very lucky and honored to be a part of this panel. Yes, my name is Nina. I use they, them pronouns. I'm currently studying in Granada. So
Nina, we lost you again. I hope your connection gets better. Can you hear us? But it's so normal. I mean, after attending digital events for a year, we are all used to having this type of problems. So don't worry, Nina. If you want, I can read the rest of your bio and then we can get back to you if there is any way that you can. Yes. All right. No worries. No worries. I can read the rest of your bio in the meantime. So Nina's present research involves engaging Black and trans feminist thought and evolution theory in considering an ethical orientation to the question of justice. So it's great to have you here, Nina. I hope we can hear you in the next round. So now we have Fermulen. Fermulen is a gender studies research master's student at Utrecht University. Welcome, Iyer.
Yes, thank you very much for having us, for invite. I feel honored as well. My name is Iyer. I'm also using the pronouns they, them, and I'm currently studying in Utrecht University and I'm writing my thesis, in fact. So I'm very much active in the process of writing at the moment. And my interest in writing lies within transness and trans ontology, as well as departing from radical Black feminist scholarships. And I'm trying to incorporate poetics within my work. Yeah, that's it for now. And I would love to talk more. And I'm looking forward to be vulnerable with each other.
Thank you very much, Iyer. Next, we have Omar Kasmani. Omar is a postdoctoral research associate in social and cultural anthropology at the Collaborative Research Center of Equal Societies at Freie Universität Berlin. Welcome, Omar.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for including me. I'm also super excited to be part of this conversation and to be with everyone on the panel. And thanks for the introduction. I think a lot of so I'm an academic, so a lot of my work basically straddles the study of religion. And when I say religion, I mean Islamic life worlds in particular, and the work of queer and affect theory. I think that's what keeps me really excited. And one of the things that I'm interested in is to really think about these historically disinclined analytical objects or scholarly objects, religion and queer, and to really think about what can be a possible companionship, let's say. At least that's the book that I've finished recently. And I'm interested in looking at these intersections, which are both notoriously difficult and at best haltingly adaptive. The other thing that I'm particularly interested in which is my Berlin work, which really looks at how looking at memoir and how bringing it to bear on geography. So a city, for example, what are those possibilities? So for me, I think to bring memoir to bear on the geography considers basically how time binds the narration of one life to the many affective mappings of the city. And that is something that I explore through writing. And I'd be happy to talk about it with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. Next, we have, I would say last but not least, of course, Riva Sayek. Riva is a queer feminist writer, independent publisher, archivist, and the founding editor of Call, a journal for body and gender research. Riva, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here with all of you and have this conversation. Thanks for the introduction. So I have the privilege of being on both sides or many sides of the writing process. As both a writer myself, I'm currently pursuing a master's in gender studies and writing my thesis as well. And an editor for Kahal, which brings about different considerations about what writing is, especially that Kuhal is a journal. It's a, we define it as a queer radical publication from the South. And just trying to think about how writing processes can be different and can be collaborative. So for instance, I've been hosting a writing circle that meets periodically with a group of people where we were able to really think through like the different stages of writing, but also what does it mean, like who inhabits what we write, and how is it that we can then collaborate, and is writing always inherently collaborative? And those are questions that I'm hoping we can explore more together today. So thank you again.
Thank you, Riva. I mean, even the introduction started like opened some really interesting questions. So now I will give the stage to Daniela to start with the first question. Daniela, are you with us? Yes.
Yeah, I'm with you. Hi. This is a question that I want to hear from all of you on, if all of you want to answer. And we're going to start quite broad with if you could sort of describe your writing process and how writing as a practice helps you to develop and refine your ideas. And yeah, I mean, maybe we can sort of start with describing your writing process, and also what role does the audience or an imagined audience play for you in your writing? I guess all of the writing that if you're writing for a play, or you're even writing a thesis, or writing for the journal, there's always going to be an audience, whether large or small. But perhaps you can also talk about whether you do any writing that's more for yourself. And I don't know if Omar, if you want to start.
Sure, I'll give it a shot. I think one of the things I've discovered over the years, my earlier work was in Pakistan, which was my PhD work. And then as a postdoc, I started writing about Berlin. What I also discovered through these two projects is that I write about different places differently. It's also about my relation to those places. And so the work on Berlin is a work on migration, and it sort of, I came to realize, or I came to understand that that I'm a migrant myself. And, so it was very hard to not, for that work to not become personal. It became very personal. It became quite queer. It also then brought a lot of vulnerabilities into my writing. So I think that, so for me, the process also then really depends on my relationship to the object that I'm describing, let's say, right? And so I think that's one thing I would say about the process. You also talked about imagined readers, and I think that's interesting because I recently, and Tunay was earlier mentioning this in our sort of informal conversation, wrote this text where I almost start with this idea that writing is an overture. It's a move which is seeking to land with a reader. I describe it as a flirtation. I describe it as a cruising, because it's about what kinds of moves actually land or do not land, right? So I use the metaphor of cruising to understand how writing is this kind of encounter on a kind of it's a loose but also targeted pursuit. It happens in some kind of a defined field, and so we might not know the ultimate reader, but we imagine that what I'm writing, what I'm saying, actually, transfers somewhere. But we cannot be sure whether the moves that I make as a writer, whether they will land or not, or something else will happen. So one has to be open to disappointment, to failure, to excitement, release. But I also sort of, I want to say, when I say cruising, I don't want to make writing a kind of a gay experience or tied to like a very male, masculine kind of act, because the ways in which I write are very, I call them thin, I call them permeable, personal, partial. And it's basically about this kind of, it's about seeking certain kinds of interactions by the act of writing. And because this, I like that let's say the title of this panel is Writing the Loneliest Exercise or something like that. And I think that writing for me is always about keeping company. So it may come across when I do write, I like to be in a solitary space. I mean, solitary not because I write in cafes, but it's a solitary mode, right? I'm by myself, even if I'm in a public space. But I don't think that I can write without the company of the books I read or the people I'm inspired by or my interlocutors, all of that. So it's a way of keeping citational, affective companies, let's say intellectual companies. It's a way of being in company and maintaining company. So for me, there's this interesting dialogue between being in a mode by myself, but always being with and speaking with others. So in that sense, it's almost collaborative.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I've always kind of thought that a book needs a different kind of map, like a reference list and an acknowledgement section doesn't really do justice to how many things inspire, and not just inspire you while writing, but also like as a reader and in your life, like if there was some way of kind of a big fold out map in which you could trace like every place and every person, and every conversation and every encounter that contributed to how you felt when you wrote that would be nice. But in some ways also what you said about writing being like cruising, it's an encounter that often, maybe when you write, you hope to kind of create encounters or kind of foster a kind of intimacy with someone. But at the same time, most of the time your audience is silent, right? Maybe you have people might write an email to you or respond to you after you publish something, but in other ways, it's like you don't have it speaking back in the same way. Does anyone else want to pick up and talk about their own practice?
I can go, and there's also a question in the chat that really, I mean, it speaks to the answer I was just about to give. So maybe I'll link with that. It's about like, should one rather, I'm reading from Anike, rather be free from personal memories and emotions, or is it okay if one publishes a story that is very personal? And I think that this question really describes what for me is the writing process, because when we write about queer theory or, you know, about feminism, I do not think that it can in any way be separate from what is personal and what is effective. And I think that in a lot of ways, we are stripped of this ability to weave that into the text because of, you know, the standards of publishing, of writing, of what is out there. But every time as an editor, I'm speaking as an editor right now, I encounter a story about queerness, about feminism, it is a story that is personal. And so for me, the writing process starts here. What is it really? What is the story that we actually want to tell? And once we remove all the layers, you know, like there's a lot of hiding behind theorists, especially like cis white male theorists, etc. And then if we remove all of these layers, then what is it that really stays in the text? And this is what I'm interested in. This, for me, is what constitutes the writing process or the very core of it. Once we have this clear, then we can understand what it is that we want to do with the piece and where we're going with this. And it responds also to what Tamer was just saying about, you know, the idea of citation as memory. I mean, it is a kind of whom are we speaking with? Whom are we making discourse with? And, you know, those are questions that are as important as, you know, the stories that we are trying to tell, because it's ultimately about who do these stories belong to? And once we have this answer, then it becomes, you know, quite clear to us also, like, who are we inviting to this conversation, right? Concerning the role of the audience, I think that in a lot of ways, when we write, we are haunted by this idea and we are maybe scared by it even, because we see ourselves through the gaze of the systems that we are trying to dismantle. And therefore, without really realizing, we end up trying to respond to or anticipate what this could say about us, like would this fetishize us, etc. Like, I mean, all of these considerations that, you know, that can become apparent in a text. And I think for me, I mean, which is something I do as a writer, as well as an editor, I try to, you know, write for me and for those who matter to me. without, we can never be free from, this gaze, but at least trying to go back to what is important and why is it, that I'm doing what I'm doing. And so the importance is that in that is that ultimately, once the text is finished, then we can decide who the audience is. Because a lot of times, maybe the conversation we want to have is a conversation that we want to create as a community, rather than always having to position ourselves, as a response to the systems of power that we are criticizing in our writing. This doesn't mean that there aren't pieces that are, deliberately provocative or that are trying to deconstruct something, but I think this really needs to be clear and conscious ultimately, because also a lot of our processes do not have to be necessarily mindful, and that's okay. And I mean, I'll just, before passing it on, for me, like really writing is about what haunts us. It's about bringing all those ghosts from, our personal memories, our collective memories, our ancestors, but also the communities that we are creating together. And therefore, it's never lonely because it is haunted, but we can also create community around it. And maybe this is something to talk about later.
Thank you. Maybe we can hear from Irim now.
Yes, Ir or Iram?
Yeah, Irim. I'm
Okay.
thinking about how you also, write for a sort of, as a playwright, you write for an immediate audience in the theatre, but then you also write in other formats. Maybe you can talk about that.
Yes, when it comes to text, I have very interesting relationship and approach because of the theater background, and because with the contemporary theater, that's sort of this conflict within conventional theater. Because in conventional theater, we can see the text as a starting point and it creates this hierarchical structure. And within this contemporary theater and post-dramatic theater, we can see that this hierarchy are trying to be, distorted. And so for me, as a starting point, I try not to take the text as a base, but it's more like coming together as a collective and start rehearsing and improvising, and also letting performers to reflect also their personal stories, also verbally creating their own text, but also action and mise-en-scène on stage. So also taking the text, as I said before, not as the base or starting point, but just one of these elements which forms the performance itself, along with music, sound, stage design, even costumes and all of that. So that's why I have this, some intimacy and distance at the same time with text. But for me, as I also work with personal stories, and the base of it, even I work with professional performance during rehearsals, or if I moderate workshops, creative writing workshops with other participants who are not performers, but just there to discover themselves as writers. What I try to do is transforming this personal narration, or discovering this personal narration in different forms in which they feel more comfortable. I would say for me, what becomes important, as also Omar said, I really like that as this flirtation, because I feel the same way when the audience comes to stage and watches or experience the performance. It should be, the text should be something like this shared sensual experience almost, or the text should have this intimacy of invitation for coming closer and whispering to ear of the audience. And for the audience in mind, I would say there's this definition of directors in theater, the person who gets to see the performance for the first time. So I'm also becoming the audience of myself at the same time. And I sort of like this approach because I want to direct or create a play that I like to see as an audience as well. So that would be my first question in mind, like what I want to see, what I want to hear when I go to a performance.
Thank you. I'm not sure if we made it clear at the outset, but Nina and Ir work together as co-authors and have produced text together, and have also held in our conference, in the SVR conference last year, held a creative writing exercise. So maybe you would like to talk about that and about your writing practice in general. And hopefully we have Nina's connection. Okay, otherwise you just have to write in the chat and we'll read it for you.
Yes, again, I apologize about my connection. I hope you all can hear me now. So just as I get a notification that says your internet connection is unstable. Yeah, so I really appreciated what some folks were saying about writing as being this process that brings in and engages other voices. And part of that is being this process that is listening to those oftentimes voices that we turn down the volume of, or these voices, these stories that are not necessarily told. And before I talk about maybe more of like the creative process that Ir and I have been embarked on in the past and are embarking on together in the present, I kind of want to talk about this idea of like, it's so interesting because I don't think about the audience at all when I'm writing. And I think that thinking about the audience for me ultimately results in me being motivated by fear versus curiosity. And so much of what my process has been during this moment of COVID, which has been such an extended moment, has been curiously engaging with texts, curiously engaging with written word, in what is obviously like the process of writing my thesis. But in this kind of like, as you said, Omar, interactive process, but also what I like to think of as this interactive process, like this new materialist process in terms of thinking about how the written word before is informing what I'm writing now. Like things that are around are always informing what we're writing now. And I think for me, the audience and this idea of like the written word as a final product is exactly the opposite of what I think of when I think of as writing, because writing for me is so much more than this final printed out, here you go, neat, clean thing. It's that process, it's that interactivity, it's all of the curiosity that is motivated behind that. And I think that that is for me also an acknowledgement of writing as like as a decolonial process. Like I think I just came from earlier this morning, a thesis defense of someone who was acknowledging this as her defense is not just the whole process, right? Like it's not just the product that matters, it's the whole process before. So I just wanted to highlight that like the product, if you will, at the end doesn't ever really do justice to all of the work that has come in before, all of the work that will come in after, and kind of that interactivity that comes into play when the audience is reading as well. And then in terms of like collaboration in writing, yeah, maybe Ir and I can talk a little bit more about that. I think that there are definitely moments when like we are maybe isolated from each other in our writing process, but we're never lonely in our writing process. For example, the collaborative piece that we wrote before was like there were moments where we were writing separately, but we were always still in conversation with one another in different regards. I don't know if Ir, you want to add more things with that now, speaking about the past piece that we wrote, because I also think there's a lot that can be said about the ways in which we support each other in this current process that are collaborative, that are working with one another, even though our projects are like objectively separate. But that might come later on when we start to talking about editing and vulnerability. So
yes, I would like to add on some stuff, because I think for me, as we've talked about, or as Nina just mentioned, and I think as Omar and Riva also very perfectly mentioned, that writing is not this one-way process. It's this two-dimensional relationality between you and the text, and you become transformed, and it's not something that you do by yourself. And what I feel like that our process has very much been is this separate writing, but then when we come together, we talk and we think together, and that is what causes this very transformative or interactive piece, which does stand alone but also is together. And I think that's where the effective potential can be in because I think you also very much see the vulnerability we have in between these conversations. You see us with our thoughts like going after each other. Yeah, let's talk more about it on a later question.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about what you're currently working on compared to what you worked on last year. And yeah, we can talk about that when we come to the vulnerability portion. I think Tunay will, I mean, unless anyone of our speakers wants to add something that anyone else has said, then if not, Tunay has our second question.
I mean, maybe just a little comment about the responses. It's just really fascinating because we all have very different ways of understanding writing. And speaking of imagined readers, I was always amazed with like the difference between theater work and academic writing, because when Irem is like staging a play, I would see her getting the applauses or talking with the reader right away. This is not something that we can easily get as academic writers, or when you are writing and putting out like something to the world. And in academic journal, it usually takes months, sometimes years, to really get a response and understand how it is being received, etc. And yeah, also the ontology of writing and this link between personal and affective, it's really beautifully put. I guess this leads to the next question really well. If you don't have any comments, I will start talking about the issue of obstacles, because so far we discussed writing as something that is definitely an act of exploration, sometimes self-exploration, because for me also, as a queer Turkish author, for me, writing was the way that I explored my identity, explored who I am, what I like. So it was very intimate at the very beginning. And then it took me some time to also not distance myself in a bad way, but to understand that writing can create its own world, and it doesn't necessarily need to, it is still rooted in me, but it can grow into different things as well. But it is just a journey, really the journey of the writing world. So I guess my next question would be about the obstacles that we face, especially considering that we all have different practices and approaches to writing. What obstacles do we face in the process of researching, writing, creating, revising a particular project and text, and how do we make sense of it? So I would ask this question to Nina. Would you like to respond to this issue? Because we were talking about vulnerability and obstacles.
Yeah, sure. So the question was, what obstacles do we face in our writing process? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I very unfortunately am someone who my brain does not work in a sequential way at all, which is hard when a lot of the times writing or reading a written piece demands some sort of legibility, right? So I think that it's a constant practice of confronting vulnerability for me, because in my mind, there's all of these things which folks have acknowledged before are often very, very personal, sometimes relying on direct personal experience. But I also think there's just a vulnerability in kind of sharing or trying to share what your thought processes are, or the ways in which you kind of want to engage with multiple different texts, the ways in which you want to engage with the world through the word, if you will. And so normally I know that this is like, this does not work for me every single time, but still I do it every single time, which is that I just kind of put everything on the page. Everything. I have, like, if you could see my poor computer right now, there's so many different documents that are open. And then I do my best to kind of piece together what I can. And I think I've come to accept that, again, the final product of what I've written is not necessarily a manifestation of the journey that I was on in the written process, which I think is also a practice and praxis of taking in vulnerability and maybe transforming it into, I don't know if we want to say like what's more realistic, or being kind as my approach to like this practice of what is really vulnerable. But yeah, I don't have a traditional way. I know when I've attended many workshops before of how to write or how to help myself in the writing process, there's a very kind of neat, legible, like start with an outline, start with a research question. And I really wish that that's the way that my brain worked, but my brain doesn't work that way. And so it's a much more, I wish I could say all over, like the reality is it's an all over the place process. And I hope that in the end, there's a way for me to weave it all together.
Thanks, Nina. Riva, you mentioned Whole Journal as a queer radical journal from the South. So I guess there must be like, what was the motivation behind, and would you reflect on this obstacle point as an editor, as a writer?
Yes, actually, well, initially the idea behind Kahal was to actually disrupt the locality of where knowledge is produced. So in addition to, being able to really have a space where we can explore what queer theory and affect means to us, right? It was also about like really removing the center of knowledge as one being geographically tied to Western academia in particular. And it is ironic because I'm a migrant. I moved to Paris last year, and I only started writing more when I left Beirut. And it made me think a lot about what it means then to occupy certain geographies, certain contexts, and still do this labor of writing. Because writing under the circumstances of, let's say, economic collapse that is still happening and ongoing in Lebanon, was not the same as writing even under lockdown in a context like Paris, where a lot of the considerations and obstacles in the daily life, even like basics, water, electricity, all of that are available and afforded. And I mean, I know it sounds very simple, but really like disrupting locality is also about what different kinds of labor and what different kinds of obstacles are then brought into the process of writing itself, without mentioning that it's completely unpaid. Not that it is in academia, but but still, like, it's possible to like maybe for some, for writing to become a career when it's not in other places. As an editor, maybe to speak to that, because I work mostly with students and early career academics, I have noticed two major obstacles. The first one is imposter syndrome. And I think it really has to do with, I don't know, like I think there's a massive issue with, and it's not just an issue that is general, right? It's an issue that is gendered, that is racial, with academia, and who is allowed to write in those spaces, and who is allowed to take space, to occupy space, to reclaim discourse, and to say that we're not just being marginalized to talk about this particular expertise, but we can actually theorize, right? And occupying that space comes with a lot of personal cost and journey, which is why creating community around that is a different way of resisting and writing. And then the second one really has to do with capitalist realism and the requirements behind deadlines and the pressure to produce, like the pressure of production and having to meet certain standards and timeframes, and all of the mental pressure that comes with that. And one thing I've noticed with the writing circle, what we did was really not focus on the product. I mean, although we did have a publication timeline, we just said that this is the time for us, to be together and discuss writing. And we actually don't want any product from anybody. If it happens, then great. And the opposite happened. Everybody actually sent a draft on time, which has never happened before, like in the history of Kahal. I don't know about other journals and publications, but really like going about in a different way, I think just really takes away this pressure from always having to be doing something that's productive, showing a product as something that would show to the world our worth. When it's not about that, we can still be in community and make discourse without having to individualistically produce, like just being part of those conversations is enough, is worthy, and is part of the political work that we do.
Thank you very much, Riva. I mean, you open many very interesting subjects now. I hope we can revisit some of them. By the way, for the audience, if you have any question, please feel free to use the chat function. We will definitely read them, or we will also have a short Q&A at the end. So please feel free to use that. And we are talking about obstacles, and Riva pointed out this issue about like, maybe I can point it as like neoliberalization of academia, which is something that we all suffer, I guess, wherever you are in the world now, like this pressure of producing and putting out product, this academic work as a product. This is very troubling. Yeah, and maybe Omar, would you like to respond to that as well, as someone from academia and with experience of publishing? What are the obstacles that you would like to point out?
I think I don't have a very good answer, I have to say, but I would build on, I like what Riva was talking about earlier. I think it took me a while, I would say, to, and I think it's always an obstacle in a way to find your interlocutors. And by interlocutors, I don't mean people that you interview and write about, but again, the community that you want to build of people who read your work, or who you're inspired by, or who will sort of support, so this idea of community building that Riva was talking about through the labor of writing. And I think it takes a while, especially if one writes in registers that are, let's say, less normative, or which are considered perhaps less academic, or they're seen as, oh, this is great memoir, but why should we, what is the value of this? Where is the theory? Those kinds of things. And I think one of the things I've learned over the years is that there is a community that you can build and you can find, but that's the work you have to do. It doesn't come to you naturally, and it doesn't come to you, it's not given, right? So I think that's one of the struggles. I mean, I've been lucky, but I would say that, but it's always, it's an ongoing struggle. You always have to find people. I'm sometimes complaining that my intellectual interlocutors are somehow outside Berlin. The German Academy doesn't somehow, the reception of my work in the German Academy is different than it is in the Anglophone Academy, for obvious reasons, because I think I read, I engage with that discourse, perhaps, or that also have that sensibility. But it's this question of where my interlocutors are, who will be those people that I write with. We were talking about citation companies earlier. So it's, you're never writing by yourself. So this idea of building a community, and that takes time, right? It takes time. So I think, and you also have to nurture it. It's not like you do one project with someone, or you have these people and then you forget about it, right? So you also have to give back. It's a structure of care. And I think that for me is something that, it has taken time.
Thanks, Omar. As someone in the German academia, I can understand what you, I mean, this issue about like definitely attaching value to certain type of academic work, and like value in quantitative work about the qualitative work, or as you said, like calling a certain type of academic work more like a memoir, etc., is definitely a problem. And citation communities can maybe help us to build more transnational networks that goes beyond our own geographic locality. But at the end, it is, I mean, I like Riva's formulation of this, like writing as disruption also, like you end up disrupting a certain locality by writing also and doing something different. So there's definitely, I mean, we are talking about obstacles, but it is very much attached to also kind of new opportunities and potentials as well. Irem, Iyar, would you like to respond to that as well? The question of obstacles?
Yes, I also, not Irem.
No, I mean, I don't want to give you the spotlight if you don't want to speak, but I mean, please feel free to jump in if you would like to talk. Yes.
No, Iyar can continue. I thought it was me. I always confuse the names.
You can talk if you want, but I can also say something. It's fine.
Yeah, we have time. We can do.
I mean, for me, it was interesting to hear how it's working in the academia with obstacles and what you mentioned. But within the theater scene or artistic scene, I don't know, I would say it's similar what Omar said. Also, it takes time. I think it really takes some time within this theater scene, because it's also interesting with obstacles. For instance, it was different for me, those obstacles, when I was doing my job in Turkey. So it was mostly based on almost trying to hide or metaphorically imply your identities. But when it comes to Germany, it was as this complete opposite, more like exposing your identities, because that's the way also with all visa procedure and also applying the fundings. So for me, this sharp distinction between how it works in Turkey and Germany could be the biggest obstacle that I'm trying to, work on currently. And I guess that's gonna take some time. That's what I wanted to say.
If I could just jump in, that makes me think of your piece that you wrote for is it called Waving Cities? This blog.
Yes.
Yeah, about being on the U8 and kind of pulling your things between your different places where you're living on the U8 and in one moment, and then suddenly becoming this kind of like regal theatre goer, and just that just made me think about that. But,
yes, correct.
Schools, and I would like to hint on the fact from neoliberalist notion that in writing is also within an audience. And I feel like that right now, for instance, I'm starting from personal and go into the like how like, the body and how to do, and so I think one of the obstacles in my religion is opening up yourself, and you're expecting a certain that allow this different, I think, countering that neoliberalist notion of writing and doing. I also like what Annika said, that in one line she said, what could the negative impacts be of publishing a story that might be very personal, and we see that everything needs to be universal or everything needs to be recognizable. What is the potential of it not being that narrow or recognizable? Because I think that's where the knowledge gets produced as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Yair. Thank you, Ren. Daniela, would you like to pose the next question, or?
I would, thank you, Tunay. So yeah, I mean, that makes me think about this idea that I think both Riva and Omar have talked about in their work as kind of making the self the archive, or when you make yourself vulnerable, or when you involve yourself in any way in writing, which, as it was pointed out, we all do. All writing is in some way personal. You kind of, the self becomes the source material in some ways, and obviously in traditional white cis-dominated academia, that can mean you sort of are at risk of losing your credibility, or being read as being not academic, or in some way looked down upon for making your identity a cornerstone of your theoretical work. But yeah, maybe on the theme of vulnerability, I want to talk about vulnerability both as in terms of having your work revised, which may be something that you do collectively, whether or not you write as part of a group or as part of a duo. Presumably you have editors or readers who are going to respond to your work, and what kind of vulnerability does that produce for you? And then anything you want to say about the theme of vulnerability in general, and maybe we'll start with you, Nina.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think that as I noted before, I'm someone who I need a lot of revision. Like I've never written a single thing, and then that is what is the final piece. And I really appreciate folks talking about kind of creating this community of folks who will engage with your work, of people who will maybe act as more of like these mentors and reading it and really fostering that as the community of people who will also be contributing to what ends up as the final thing. So I guess right now, to speak to the process that I'm in right now, which again is a very isolating process, but is not necessarily a lonely process. And a large part of that is because I share so much of my work with Ear, actually. Ear and I were in class together the last year. And so we were able to foster and begin this kind of and build this ground of trust in a relationship around being vulnerable academically, but also being vulnerable in terms of how we're seeing and engaging with text, how we're seeing and engaging with the world, and how we then want to take those things and put them in conversation or in dialogue with one another in written form. So I think some of you, you noted this, but last year, Ear and I wrote a collective piece together. And part of that was writing things separately, bringing them together, revising together, and revising on their own. And I think that really built for me the bedrock of trust in what is a very vulnerable process to me, which is sharing the craziness that is my mind in written form. And so part of the revision process, I think for me, like ideally, we also have to submit to supervisors as part of this academic structure in the revision process. And there are definitely moments when, because I'm not someone who writes in a traditional way, I don't necessarily adhere to the rules of what academic writing is, because I, as folks have mentioned, have an immense amount of academic insecurity and also don't come from an academic background. I think that it's a really vulnerable process to submit these things and receive feedback that more often than not are saying, in so many words, you need to rewrite this entire thing. And so I think it's really helpful to then be able to talk things through out loud with people who I have trust with, so that revision process is not only me taking the advice or the criticism, the constructive feedback that I get from other people, be it my supervisor, be it from Ear. Poor Ear has to read all of the processes. But that part of the revision process too is talking things through. And I think that in this moment of COVID, where I am more isolated than I normally am, one of the challenges that I made to myself was to try to talk about my thesis project, which is for lack of a better framing, relies on a lot of theory in a more casual way. And I think that has been incorporated into a revision process of what works, what doesn't work. So I guess all of that is just to say that having a community of folks who you feel comfortable sharing with, but you also feel comfortable being vulnerable when things don't feel comfortable anymore. And also challenging, at least for me, challenging myself to talk about things in a way that is not just limiting them again to that written word.
I really like what you all said here, and I couldn't agree more. And I was also interested in the question of vulnerability for you, because you say to me that I know that you are vulnerable with me, but that also places a different role on the person who's rephrasing. And I would love to hear your thoughts, and also Riwas, perhaps as you are a rephraser, how you take that responsibility with that vulnerability that comes with it. Whereas sometimes I'm just afraid to be too negative, and I know you're being vulnerable with me, and especially because we went through this special process together, that it could be extra harsh or hard to get or hard to take. What are your thoughts on that, on the balance?
Yeah, I really appreciate that you're bringing in someone who is an editor in this role. But I guess just to quickly respond, I think that for me, I come back to this mantra of curiosity versus fear. And I come back to this, rather than, again, as just a practice of how I want to move through the world, and also how I want to engage with different texts and how I want to write. It's not about providing these answers. It's not about these clean, legible things. It's about asking more questions. And so I think when I receive feedback that objectively is harsh or maybe more negative, I'm wow, this is wonderful. This person is pointing out these things that I didn't necessarily see, because maybe I'm seeing them right here. Or this is another opportunity to bring in this, or this is an opportunity that maybe doesn't necessarily need to, I can cut this part, it doesn't necessarily need to be here. But yeah, I'm curious how folks who have been in that I guess Kiwa, you're the only one who maybe is in that position, but maybe Omar, you as well have been in that position, like how you approach editing.
Well, I mean, at first, I think what I tried to do was to edit the peer reviews because I mean, lots of them are really like, I mean, because I know who the writer is and I know who the reviewer is. And then I'm like, okay, so if this writer gets this review, then it's really gonna, you know, this paper is not gonna go anywhere because it's not encouraging, it's not helpful. I mean, it is helpful, but I mean, it will kind of, you know, not help them go forward with the writing process. But I think our approach has changed considerably in the sense that I'm finding myself, I now prefer more to engage with the people like directly rather than, I mean, no, I do still engage with the writings, of course, but for me, it's more interesting to have this process with the author and really engage with the author. And so it's not just the email back and forth. I really prefer when we're able to sit and talk together. I mean, it's not possible physically, but you know, through Zoom and all of this. And the experience we had with the queer feminisms issue, which was out last December, it was really a workshop that we had face-to-face in Beirut, and we brought like 8 writing projects, 9 writers, because one of them was a collaborative project, together, and we discussed, you know, queer theory and methodology and what this means. Thank you for sharing the link. And really, I mean, the way the issue came together was something I've personally haven't experienced before in Kahul. And so I thought that this is the kind of processes that we need to work on as editors. And so this is how the writing circle came to be. It's actually really people who are eventually going to be the authors of a particular issue on counter archives that are meeting with me, with other people who are involved in the editing process, and just discussing, you know, I mean, being vulnerable together, since this question is about vulnerability, because, you know, we talked about, you know, queer death, queer burials, you know, explosions, migration. There's a lot of affect happening there. And for the first time, I felt I did not really need to see a draft early on. And just having it at some point in the process was enough, because we went through this process together. And so it's really making me reconsider whether systematic and rigorous engagement with the text is always the way to go. Like sometimes it's really about, you know, just having a conversation and seeing where this goes. Like it doesn't have to be this focused on the words and the details. And I mean, it can at the end so that it's publishable, of course, but is that the processes that we want to create always? I mean, sometimes, you know, maybe it's some people's preferred mode of doing things, but then what happens when we really want to write in communities? Then maybe our imaginations have to, you know, orient themselves towards something else.
May I add something to that from the other side? I think going through my book reviews, I think it was such an interesting experience. But also, I think one learns through these, through the experience of your work being reviewed and read in detail and sort of engaged with, that one of the things that one learns is that, you know, it's not one individual, because in a sense, the reviewer also represents a whole body of readers, right? So you also then can see that if this person doesn't get this point or this flow of the argument or whatever, that this person might not be the only person. I think that's a good way to also deal with criticism sometimes, or at least I've learned to sort of deal with it. But I think what I also learned through the process was how important it was to have a good editor on your side. And I think the editorial care I received, and I really started, I think I've come to understand the work of editors very differently through this personal experience. And I'm of course talking about a good experience, right? It could have also gone in another direction, but you realize at least that there is a certain that criticism, if it's coming from the right place, I think that's very important. How is somebody engaging with your work? And that it can grow. It can really grow through that process if you have the right people, if you have the right kind of sensibilities. And one more thing is, I think you sometimes also realize when you go through these rough processes that you're actually knocking at the wrong door. This is not the venue for you. I think one should also think about where you want your work to be showcased. Where do you want it to go? What is the future you want for your work? Because I mean, when we write, we're talking about, imagine readers and all of that, but we're also interested in a certain kind of futurity of our ideas. We want that work to be read, to be written about, in the sense that you want people to do something with it, right? To make it their own. You want your text to have other lives. So I think it's very important to also think, when we're talking about communities and all of that, it's also important to think about the journeys, right? So where do you want your text to go? What are the right places for your kind of work, your kind of sensibility? Because not everybody's going to like your text, and you're not writing to make everybody happy anyway. So I think that's also something you learn. It's a trial and error thing. You go through all these, you realize, my God, this is like the wrong place. And sometimes you have to redirect.
Yeah, you both said that, yeah, you're both spot on. Professionally, I work as an editor and proofreader and translator. And so I feel like I'm really hearing what you're saying about the benefit of having a good editor and someone, or, being able to begin with the person rather than begin with the text, which is so important for even understanding the motivations behind the text. Or, yeah, I find it quite uncomfortable sometimes in my job, because often I'm just presented with a Word document and a deadline, and I don't have the time. Maybe I've never even met the person in many instances, and I will never meet them, but I'm still changing their words without having that kind of foundation of understanding or any kind of mutual conversation, bar a few emails or a few notes in the comments function. And yeah, when you talk about process, Omar, I mean, I think in my work, what I've been quite shocked to discover is how little process there is sometimes on the kind of editorial and publishing end. Like sometimes the amount of time that editors get to look at something, and then how little a publisher can actually engage with the work before they publish it can be quite shocking. So, which I suppose is also like a neoliberal imperative to get everything done faster. And yeah, I think it really discredits the whole process. And I'm trying to work out how I can, kind of meet more of these ideals in my own work. And also editing is also a process of, when we are talking about the final text, the process of proofreading, correcting grammar. And I'm often correcting the grammar or doing English language proofreading for people whose native language isn't English. And also, I think, language should be malleable, but then again, as an editor, I'm often working with an Oxford guide that tells me that this is right and this is wrong. And I think a lot about how to accommodate what they call linguistic diversity. And I mean, also translation is a whole separate issue. And I think, you've had your play translated into a different language and then translated plays as well. So I wonder if you want to jump in on this topic and talk about, you can talk about your own vulnerability maybe in the review process of your plays, but then also how do you engage with texts as a translator perhaps?
Yes, with the vulnerability, I think I have the privilege of having this instant encounter with the audience, and I can also observe their experience during the play. Sometimes it could be horrible because sometimes people might leave the performance as well, which is very embarrassing. But in time, of course, you get used to it. But also the privilege here, I would say, sometimes according to feedbacks, if we have certain consensus within the team, within the collective, we can also edit or change even the text or performance itself. So performance itself becomes something mutated in time. So that's also what I like about performance and being in theater. And about the translation, I also translated a few plays from Spanish to Turkish. And of course, it's a difficult process to, because you're becoming this medium, this mediator, and also you need to be, just transforming the writer's main idea and what they believe in. It's a very big responsibility, I would say, because you're doing sort of this rewriting. So for me, translation is very difficult and it's a big responsibility. And when my texts are being translated, of course, I'm always in contact with translators, and sometimes they ask me what I meant there and stuff like that. So we always have this transparency. And also as a translator, I try to provide that transparency with the writer themselves.
Perhaps.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Jumping.
Do you have a comment, Daniela?
No, it's fine.
No, it's fun. Okay, perfect. Thank you all. I mean, it's very interesting. So we talked about editing and the collectivity. So this kind of like brings us to our next question. So far, Riva, you mentioned about this issue about like writing and whose stories are we telling. I'm also receiving this notification saying my internet connection is unstable. So please warn me if there's any problems with that. So I'm just curious about that. I mean, as an academic, as an activist,
I can't hear you.
You can't? Oh no. How is it now? No.
Too soon to tell. Keep talking. I would turn off your video.
Okay, I turned off my video. I will try this way, but let me know if it's still bad. My question was, it's not good. Okay, Daniela, would you like to do the next question?
Wait, it's fine now.
It's fine now?
Keep trying. If I have to stop you again, then I can continue.
All right, so my digital apologies to everyone who's disturbed with this. A little water break. So my question is actually about the communities and activism, because sometimes we are sharing other stories. It's not good, right, Daniela? Okay. So,
I think it's too bad, sorry.
All right, no worries. I think it's fine. I mean, I can turn on my camera, but Daniela, please read the question. Thank you.
This is why it's great to have two moderators. Okay, so our next question is regarding, it's kind of related to the idea of vulnerability, but maybe in the hands of other people. So it's about how you navigate the power dynamics in your writing process, especially when you're writing about certain communities, especially communities maybe that you're not part of. I'm not sure, Tunay, if you had an idea about who you wanted to start with this. Anyone?
Yeah, I think Riva's comment was very interesting. Maybe if you would like to start again, Riva, that would be writing from communities, writing within communities, writing about communities, and also it's tied to activism and how it shapes your creative process.
Yeah, I think that unfortunately, the way a lot of research and writing happens is that there's a forced distance between, the researcher and the person who's gathering all the knowledge and, the subjects of research. And the power dynamics in that is that often, people from the South or people in diaspora, queer people, find themselves to be the data of this research. And it's something, that even in queer theory, you can read more about, like, Maya Mikdashi and Jasper Puar's work on, queer theory and permanent war, so it's not something new, but it's also something that I've been grappling with, both as somebody who's a queer feminist from the South, and also, something that I've witnessed in the dynamics between different publications, because that also exists, right? So it's also about, it's beyond individuals, but also different structures. And often we have thought, does that mean that you necessarily have to be from a specific place to write about that specific place? And I think this is a very unproductive question and cycle to be stuck in. I think it's about whether we can together build a common political project and whether we are all invested in this political project. It's also about the willingness to really shift our framework and to let go. I mean, it's really about, what we would do in community. Like, this is the work that we need to do in community. So once we see writing as a process of making community, of making history, of, documenting, archiving something, a moment, a movement or movements, because there's no single movement, but also, a collectivity that we are part of, then I think this dynamic of wanting to absolutely, have this community that we are walking into to do research, like it falls apart, even if we are brought to this community as part of an ethnography or whatever. It's about, how it is that we are approaching this and why. I think asking ourselves the why we are doing this work is also very important. And I'm talking about researchers in particular. So this is one kind of maybe meta power dynamic that we need to be aware of whenever we are writing, right? And then there are also the different kinds of power that exist within communities themselves, and how is it that we can deconstruct that? Because I mean, who can write is also a big question, because as I said before, I was only able to write when I left to write in full, not, write 1,000 words, but really like longer essays and articles when I left Beirut, which went really against the initial idea for Kahal. So who can write is also a question about who has the power to write, and especially outside of writing as, being the major or the main source of income. And so those are also questions to think about. And then, it's about representation and what is it that we are bringing forth. And I don't think it's about being faithful always, because, that would be kind of impossible to achieve, but also, just being willing. And maybe that's also part of vulnerability, of going through this painful process of deconstructing the self as we are writing. And this is what, writing brings about in terms of responsibility to the communities that we are part of, but also to what we are trying to do in terms of this historical archive that we are creating collectively.
Daniela, I think my internet may not be good, so would you like to take on the moderation of this question?
Yeah, sure thing. I actually wanted to know about more about your MA work. I don't know if this is the right place to talk about it, but we've heard a lot about your role as an editor. Can you tell us like what kind of methodologies you're working on in your MA and what you yourself are writing about?
Yeah, it's a lot of it is auto theory, I would say. So it started as the queer phenomenology of orientation, and it kind of followed a bit my journey, because I moved to France 20 days after the August 4 Beirut port explosion. And so this orientation, whether there or here, like this kind of arriving, but not really arriving, and never being allowed to arrive in a way. Like that was really the starting point for the project that I'm doing. I don't know what it would look like, but it's basically a lot of it is auto theory. It's about, how I have been experiencing those shifts and those changes politically, personally, and eventually how, you know, putting my body out there in a way and writing can also inform of a meta narrative that, you know, might escape historicizing because of how marginalized it is, you know. And right now it's kind of, you know, it's moved from, I mean, obviously phenomenology is still a big part of it, but it's also moved into how is it that we sustain an elsewhere, as, you know, this idea of queer utopia and futurity, and how much of that is linked to surviving and surviving differently. And this different survival is what needs to be sustained, even if not as a coherent, you know, because, you know, coherence from a time perspective is also playing into this capitalist realism around time, but also like just going back into this space over and over again, even as it fails, and because it fails, like just revisiting it. So it's a bit that, but also doing that while laying myself bare in terms of the processes that have happened and, you know, the political moments of the past 2 years, basically. Not sure if that is an answer. Yeah, I mean, usually people have a much, you know, much crisper way of describing their writing projects, but that's where it's going.
Oh, that's definitely an answer. And the ability to describe something in one sentence is itself a kind of, I don't know, hostile imperative, I think. Omar, maybe you can tell us about, so I guess in your work, you've kind of theorized a lot of your own experiences, but at the same time, you've worked with Sufi rituals and have been kind of allowed or entered into these kind of internal spaces to watch other people practice, which, to go back to our question of how you navigate power dynamics or writing about communities that and how you position yourself in relation to them. So could you tell us something about that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I was really very excitedly listening to Reva's description of their research, although there were so many words that I thought, oh, I also like that. I also do that. Yeah, to answer the question, I mean, in a way, you know, I was earlier mentioning that my Berlin work is also a work of auto theory, and I write in fragments, and I write about my own relationship with the city, and I almost sort of, you know, I take on the style of Kathleen Stewart, so I write in the third person. So it allows me this kind of distance from myself, and because I write also about intimacies that, so it's a way of looking at an affective geography of the city by way of the intimate. And these intimacies can be intimacies with strangers in a cafe, or at a supermarket, or in a mosque. You know, performing the ritual in a very kind of sweaty, bodied kind of environment. But also men that I might be dating, or, you know, my lovers. So in a way, the ethnography, let's say, or the city moves between bedrooms, mosques, cafes, university, all the spaces that I inhabit in a way. But what is interesting about this, I mean, I will get to this question of, you know, how do we, what is the fidelity to the spaces that we write about, or the communities that we describe. I was hired to do this project after I finished my PhD. I was hired to do a project on migrant belonging, and I had to work with a Muslim religious migrant community in the city. So I had no choice, and one takes on jobs because, you know, it brings you some kind of stability. And the first thing I knew was that I don't want to write another book on Sufis, because my first book is about a Sufi context in Pakistan. I didn't want to be a Sufi studies expert. The other thing I knew was that I didn't want to be an expert in Islam in Europe. It's a conversation I'm deeply disinterested in. So, and then at the same time, I'm in the mosque, and at the time, my German wasn't very good. And through a certain kind of accident of interview, the sheikh initiated me into the community and said I would be doing the ritual with them, which was very smart because they didn't want to be observed from outside. They put me inside the circle. And in many ways, a lot of the anxieties that I was thinking about while being in the mosque was, how do I write, being a migrant myself, how do I sort of, you know, write about these people right? And what does it do to this whole notion of Parallelgesellschaft, this parallel society that, you know, migrants are constantly blamed about? So in a way, that experience, all those anxieties of being inside the mosque, and also figuring out, oh, these are my neighbors. I was literally researching a community in my neighborhood. So I thought, oh, these are neighbors that I've crossed paths with, but I've never spoken to, right? So what is it about my own classed relation to the city? Because I'm probably in a cafe right next to the mosque, but, you know, these are completely different worlds. It's a hipster cafe versus a mosque kind of thing. So all those anxieties started to, that I always call this a queer accident. The project was not meant to be queer, right? But when I started to observe myself observing these men, so that's the way that the whole third person thing came into the writing, right? So I was no longer just observing the men, I was observing myself observing these men. And the other decision I made was that I will not write about the mosque exclusively. So the project became about my own relationship to the city, but then the mosque was one fragment of many other fragments that I inhabit in the city. But then, so there is this question, of course, of a community, writing from a queer theoretical perspective about a community that might not share my political kind of leanings, right? But I'm also interested in how queerness is not external to the mosque, because I'm there, the queer researcher is inside the mosque, in a homosocial environment, feeling all kinds of strange desires towards those men who, a lot of them were good looking. So I also started writing about what is my own relationship to this mosque. So one of the ways, as I said, was to diffuse it, to not make it about the mosque. And also then in texts that are quite queer, I make sure that the community is completely unidentifiable. They anonymized to a point that it could be any Sufi community. But because I'm interested in the crossovers between queer theory and religion, I didn't want to exclude them also, just because it's a space that I observe, right? So I always say that these are not stories about myself, but I'm integral to these compositions, right? Because my body is what allows, the stories hang around the body of the researcher. So these are not perfect answers, of course, right? But as Riva was also saying, it's not about saying who can write, but it's about how do we then, how do we address those power dynamics, and how do we make ourselves also vulnerable? So if you make yourself also someone who's being observed alongside other people, you make it a little better. It's never equal, right? We make careers out of these texts. So well, that's the aim in a way, for academics at least. So all kinds of power dynamics are, it's riddled with all of those issues. Sorry, this was a very long answer. Sorry.
Absolutely. No, I mean, not absolutely. It was a long answer. Absolutely. It's riddled with power dynamics, and your answer was great. Thank you. Nina and Ira, could you perhaps speak to how this maybe applies or relates to your own work, and how you engage with some of the theories and the theorists that you engage with?
Yeah, I can give you an answer. My work so far is mostly theoretical, but that gives, I think, a different kind of responsibility. Also the politics of citation, for instance, let's talk. And reflecting and positioning yourself in relation to the people you cite, I think, is a vital thing for me to be wary of and be very engaging with at the moment. And I do find it hard sometimes, like who am I using, who am I using not, and why am I using this person not? And then on the one hand, I'm struggling because you want to incorporate sometimes some, I think, important scholars from the 1950s, but then again, you don't want to keep repeating the same discourse over and over again. And so I think that does give you a responsibility and gives you more agency as an author than you think you are, even when you're engaging with theory only. How about power dynamics by myself? Because I'm also starting from writing from embodied knowledge. I'm trying to be self-critical on myself, but I'm also still a white non-binary person in Western Europe. So that always is something I take into the back of my mind when writing, and I don't, and that gives to me the big question in writing so far is, how do I not universalize things in such a way that it's not good anymore?
Yeah, I also feel like maybe when you're writing at a MA level, or you're writing things that won't necessarily go to outside publication, it can sometimes feel like the stakes are lower, but they aren't. I think I'm trying to express that. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, do you have? Sorry, Nina, do you have something you'd like to add to that?
Mostly just gratitude for folks who have shared about their research and their processes. Thank you all. It's been a pleasure to listen. And I think I'm just thinking about how much, yeah, I guess maybe starting about talking about kind of what my current project is might be a little bit more helpful to help me organize my thoughts. So yeah, my research is, I am from the US, and I'm doing this program in Europe. And last year, when the global uprisings against police brutality and racial violence occurred, I noticed this chant that I've been using my whole life, that kind of came to the forefront, which was no justice, no peace, no justice, no peace. And I started noticing, like, in the sense of urgency, as someone who would always be on the streets, like not necessarily being on the same physical streets that I would be on in the United States, I noticed this pattern of this invocation of justice happening only following violence, and in the worst case, death. So my research is taking Black feminist thought and radical trans feminist thought and theory within the framework of abolition feminism in the context of the United States, to kind of search for this ethical, what I'm naming as like an ethical reorientation to this question of what is to be done regarding justice. And I think that something that I really felt when I started to get involved in this research was this, yeah, I mean, I think less of like, oh, this is going to be published, like, I'm like, there's no one should read this. It's not well written. No, but I think more of this kind of this ethical responsibility of what it means to kind of turn or disorient the way in which I normally engage with what I feel is like my politics, what I feel is justice, which is physically showing up in a way. And so I kind of am taking this entry point now of like, what does it mean, and what is the responsibility to be showing up in a more of a theoretical sense, like Ear said, like, what are the politics of citation in this? What does it mean to be writing about my communities? Of course, like who I know like firsthand, but that I'm now writing about like on scholarship in Europe away from this violence, right? And I think something that kind of relates back to this question of vulnerability and what folks have been talking about, but maybe have inadvertently, what folks have been talking about but have not used the direct name for is trusting that the drive, a lot of the times, it brings us to write about the things that we want to write about, that we need to have trust in what brings us there. Because I think I'm just thinking about a lot of the criticism that I've received from a supervisor that my writing is like too political, and that it's not relying enough on the theory or taking theory slow. And I think that, as you know, it's about finding your audience, but I think it's also about returning to that question of like, is what I'm doing feel like it's upholding the goal of this project? That it's coming back to this question of what is to be done? Like, why is justice being predicated on death? Is there hope? Like, what do we do about this? And so I think, in contrast to directly working with communities, like, even though I'm referencing the communities that I have worked with and stuff, and also bringing in theory, yeah, I guess all of that is just to say, I think for me, it's coming back to that question of like self and role in that.
Yeah, and go back to the question of intention and knowing for yourself why you're doing something and being driven by that, rather than the end product or the end audience. Could I ask you, does anyone, before I move on, have anything to add to this theme or any of the things that have just been said? otherwise, I would ask you all to tell me about whether you write. So I mean, you all write for work or you write for study. Do you also write little notes on your phone? Do you carry a notebook? Do you journal? Like, do you go days, weeks, months without writing, or is it really something you do every day? I want to hear about that. Shall we start with Erin?
Yes, I'm a very chaotic person, I would say. So I always keep notes, also on my phone, but I'm never good at carrying small notebooks around me, or I always lose them or forget them. But of course, I take notes. But for me, when I start writing for something planned, something more in mind, I would rather be alone in my own space without any other people. But also sometimes I try going in crowds and see how it affects my work. But for me, yes, it's usually a lonely task, I would say.
Or as someone said, solitary but not lonely, perhaps. Or is a comfortable space to be alone.
Yes, both works for me.
Thanks. And what about you, Omar? Do you have a little notebook?
I keep losing my notebooks. So I realized over the years that I don't lose my phone so often. So I'd rather keep notes on my phone. And I do that a lot while in the city. And I think one of the methods I've also developed with this work on auto theory in Berlin is that I don't walk into situations with recorders or with notebooks or also with the intention to record at all. So what I rely on is, as I say, wispy registers of memory and intimacy, things that return to me. So that also informs why the work is always partial, right? The writing or the account that I give of what I testify to in a way through writing is always partial. It's always permeable. That it means that other things come in, go out. I might remember things not well. But then, yeah, so when things return, you might be in U-Bahn, you might be somewhere, you might be doing actual research or something. Then the phone comes really handy because it's somehow less remarkable to be involved with your phone in a personal, in a social setting than to take out a book and whatever. Yeah, so and it's more practical because I don't lose it. But note taking happens a lot.
I would also say now that if anyone in the audience has questions, please write them down or just write Q in the chat if you want to ask your own question. I'll call on you.
Or adding to Daniela, if you would like to share your writing practice, we are also open to that as well. If you would like to reflect on anything that we talked about so far, that would be also interesting.
No, I mean, I really don't, I seldom write anything these days apart from tedious work emails in German. I think there's also such a, I feel like you have to be kind of actively writing in order to call yourself a writer or what, I don't know, it seems to me to be some large barrier between claiming that writing is any kind of practice or something. I mean, I journal. Yeah, sometimes I make notes on my phone. I'd like to do it more, but I feel like when I write best, it's when I feel a really strong emotional urge to do it. And I have to be in a really particular mood, and that mood kind of comes around very infrequently. But I also think it's probably a matter of making space for that mood. And when you're kind of, when you're just at work or, I don't know, watching TV, or it doesn't always create space for that kind of writing juice to flow. So that's something maybe I'll work on more in the future.
In the future, I mean, adding to this future point, Daniela, maybe I can ask one more question because we spoke about it briefly. and I hope my internet would allow me to ask this question, but let me know if you can't hear me at any moment. So now in the final minutes, maybe we can all collectively think about what might the future of writing look like. And as people who are engaged with different types of writing, and I know we already practice collective writing to a certain extent, but how would we imagine the future of writing? Am I breaking? 1, 2, 1, 2.
I heard you say that, thinking about how we could imagine the future of writing. Is there something else?
Yeah, I mean, especially there is this very popular discourse claiming that now the new media will kind of devour the writing, and the writing is dead or no more, and we will all start taking TikTok videos and turn into social media people. So no, I mean, thinking
So
that.
no, maybe you should write your message in the chat. I think.
Okay, I'll do that.
Something about social media. You said TikTok. I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just. I mean, for this SVR anthology that we're putting together, so previous contributors, including Nina, anthology, but then the SVR organizers are, we have to produce an introduction, and I'm not very experienced with kind of collective writing, and I'm wondering how we should do it, if it's like a matter of it's sitting down separately and sending in things and then getting feedback on them, or like meeting together for more workshop style, which after our discussion, I feel like that sounds what I'd be more inclined to do. But yeah, how you kind of combine the tone, if you format it like a conversation, like I saw in one of the call editorials was like italics and non-italicized text to indicate the conversation between the two editors. Which, Tunay, where's your question?
Oh yeah, I hope my internet will work this time. I'm sorry, I'm in Zoom. We all know, but so my question was the point about the future and how we can imagine the future of writing, especially in an era where we are consuming more visual. I mean, I don't see them as anything competing. I think they can be together, but still, while we are here together as people from different practices and disciplines, so how would we imagine the future of writing? And especially, I was inspired by Irem's approach to theater and performance and collectivity. And we already have Nina and ER who talked about their practice of collective writing, which is, I think, even more of an issue when you are kind of trying to establish yourself as an academic, because for some reason universities appreciate you more when you take initiative and author things solo, alone, without other people, which is a problem from my point of view. But so how we can think about that, the future, just notes. I know it's a big question, but no pressure, just some reflections. Omar, I'm seeing a smile on your face. Would you like to respond to that? How do you see yourself writing in the future, in 20 years from now on?
Tunay, that's because I'm a smiley person. You guys, I'm just smiling. Yeah, no, I think it's a grand question. I think maybe just my own relationship, or what I'm trying to do, let's say, is to think about how we can disturb or trouble forms, right? To think about the habits that in my case anthropology gives us, right? The forms that are seen as more credible. So how do we disturb those structures? And so one of the texts that I wrote and will come out later this year is a scattered text. So the idea is that these scenes will randomly appear in an edited volume in between other people's chapters. And so you go through a book, and let's say there are 10 scenes from which I've written, but I'm not concerned with coherence. I'm not concerned in that particular text with whether everyone will read all the 10 pieces or not, or will they read it in the right order. So I want them to be read in partial almost kind of scattered, accidental ways, right? So it's another way of imagining a relationship with an imagined reader, right? So, but what it does is then it removes a certain kind of investment from coherence, from linearity, from structure. It's a way of playing around. So I would say you were also talking about, you just mentioned, the kind of cross-disciplinary collaborations, people writing on the edges, people writing together. I think that would be a lovely future to, and if you're thinking about images are taking up a lot of our space or emoticons and all of that, so why not sort of also include that? Why not make space for other things to penetrate or to sort of to exist or inhabit our writing? That's probably one exciting way to think about the future.
Thank you, Omar. Yeah, I mean, as you said, the internet is already changing the way we write. I mean, I'm also like quite new in this business, but still I can see the difference already. And it's exciting. Yeah, I'm also not a pessimist when it comes to change. Riva, would you like to respond to this?
Yeah, I'm actually thinking about this. There's one collaborative piece that we've written together as part of the writing circle, and it speaks to that because we were able to just open a Google Doc and randomly fill it, literally, like it was about solidarity, transnational solidarity. And eventually it just took shape with pictures, with different stories from different parts of the world without necessarily attributing every story to a particular person. It's really a collaborative map that we did. And maybe it speaks to what Omar was saying about, the 10 stories. So for each collaborative piece, we chose one person to edit it. Otherwise, it's going to be a bit impossible. And what this person did was to include a ghost voice with our comments on the side. So the ghost just, talks a bit, but it's actually what people had actually commented on the side. So things that would never make it into a text were actually there. And it kind of disrupts, but at the same time, it's really challenges the idea of this polished text that we get without all of this process. That actually is what makes the text and what is transnational solidarity. So maybe that's my vision of futurity when it comes to writing on a collective level. On a personal level, maybe I just remembered this one time when I was still writing about, the phenomenology and being haunted and all of that. And I was in the middle of lockdown in France, which is quite harsh in comparison to Lebanon. You really can't leave your house. There's no way around. And maybe, because it answers the notion of loneliness when it comes to writing. My house gives to the train station, and at some point I just watched trains going by with no passengers whatsoever, and it felt like there was this kind of very haunted characteristic to it. And it just felt appropriate because I did feel like I was in the in-between. And I think this has to do with writing as resistance, as something we do to counter the status quo and to resist systems of power. It is a task that will always make us feel like we are in the in-between, but the idea is to be able to make those links. And part of the work that we have to do with others who also occupy or inhabit what is not necessarily real, or real in the sense of what the dominant narratives want for reality to look like. So yeah.
Thank you, Riva. Thank you. Now maybe we can hear from Nina and Iyer.
I like that we all talked about different ways collective writing. And now, Riva, as you're saying, like this refusal as a mode of engagement, quoting the Silva here, and like saying no to hegemonic ways of making knowledge. And I think that's what I see the future of writing to be, and to be writing from the margins, to be writing from different positionalities, to start using different ways of engaging with physical materiality of readings, like we did an art class, or incorporating voice memos or voice notes, different materialities of physicality in the paper. You can do so much more different ways of affecting and of making and producing knowledge that invites the senses to work in a different way, but still evokes this notion of knowledge. And I think that's what I would like writing to start being in 20 years. Thank you.
Thanks, Sierra. Yeah, sounds exciting. Nina, do you have any other comments?
I don't have much more to add, but just because I'm such a fan of Ferreira da Silva here, now you have me thinking that, yes, refusal of a mode of engagement, and to echo what folks have said, writing maybe these stories or these archives, like in this mode of futurity that is actually looking back, right? Of these things that are in the future, in the past, in the present, these stories that haven't been shared. But now I'm thinking too of like literally challenging this like law likeliness that language puts down. And part of that for me, I think, is really playing with form. And I see that a lot in the way that Ferreira da Silva uses poetics, uses mathematics. And I think LA and like a lot of other folks to use imagery, or maybe use emojis, who knows. I literally only have an email, so I'm not the person to be talking about that. But I hope that there's more ways to bring in kind of what would be regarded as like the arts, or these outside arts, into the written practice, because I think they're always already there.
Thanks, Nina. And I guess like theater writing is the one that you can really kind of play around and add new voices, new strategies, new methods, new techniques. So I'm really curious to hear your take on this, Irem, because I know already that you are working with the text, but at the same time you are showing a video, sometimes projecting things. You have the stage, so there is more to it. So how do you see the future of writing?
Yes, definitely. Also, as I said, within contemporary theater, it's all about taking this big responsibility of the text out of the performance. But I still believe there's a dominance of the text still exists, and this is one of the things people are working on. But I believe that's because also text or writing could be one of the easiest forms of conveying a meaning. So when we take this responsibility of the meaning out of the text and try other elements, such as visuals or sound or any other elements, that can be the way that it goes furthermore, I would say. But also with the text, the interesting thing, you can also show the text. Text can become something visual, and this is how we deal with it also on stage. It's both hearable, but also it's something you can see. So text can, address to different sensualities of people. So I think we're gonna play more and more with this flexibility of the text, of the words. So that's also what I find exciting.
Thanks, Irem. We already opened the stage for questions, but thank you all again. It was such an interesting panel. I would like to ask if you have anything to add. And again, I'm encouraging the audience to also share and ask questions. No? Okay, so I guess we still have 6 minutes, but we can also end a bit early. I wish you all a really nice weekend, and thank you for participating again. Thank you for accepting our invitation. So you can follow us on SVR Gender Studies webpage. Our workshop is taking place tomorrow. And yeah, Daniela, do you have anything else to add?
I just want to say, thank you so much to our audience for being here, and thank you to our speakers. It was a pleasure to spend these 2 hours with you. And I feel like there's just so many things we could talk about. But yeah, I really enjoyed hearing about your work and meeting you online. And thank you to you too as well for your moderation.
Yeah, we will definitely take some of these questions to our workshop tomorrow. So it will definitely guide the participants to really engage with their pieces as well. All right, that's great.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really, it's been a pleasure to share the virtual room with such amazing thinkers, speakers, people from all over. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
for
so much.
organizing.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everyone.
All right, let me stop.